I get a chance to talk with a lot of young people, especially young men, who are struggling with some kind of temptation, some kind of a challenge in their life that's just been making things difficult for them. And so, as we talk about a process of really developing a plan, what are you going to do? You know this is an issue, so let's deal with it. There's kind of this picture in the Old Testament of, of this battle sequence, and in the Old Testament, God calls himself like a strong tower or fortress or a mighty fortress, a safe place, a place we run to for rescue. In fact, in Psalm 61:3, it says, "For you have been my refuge, a strong tower against the enemy." Why do you think they put their fortress or those strong towers, that place of refuge, why did they build it on a high tower or on a high hill or plain, someplace up high? Why do you think they did that? Yeah, one, it's hard to get to. Anybody who's going to attack them has to go up the hill to try to get to them. But I think the other thing is we're able to station a guard, a watchman who's looking out. And from that place, they can see all across the valley. They can see a long way off. And they can see the enemy when they're still a good distance away. Tough to be in a place that you think is fortified and the enemy can sneak up on you very quickly and attack. And a lot of us have felt that with temptation, that somehow we haven't gotten above this thing and we just get bombarded so easily. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says that all this kind of temptation is common to man. We all go through that. But God's faithful and he won't let us be tempted beyond what we're able to handle, and he will always give us a way of escape. So one of those things we have to do is learn this process, and one of it is get out of the way, get up into a high place. And so we say the first thing we want to do is run to God. When you know that you're struggling, when you know that you're going to be facing temptation, run to God, go into his presence, get that Bible open, put on that worship music, go and be in his presence wherever you are. Go and find him. Proverbs 18:10 says, the name of the Lord is a fortified tower, and the righteous run to it and are safe. So that's got to be our first impulse, is when we're feeling tempted, run to God. The Bible talks about fleeing the enemy, resist the enemy and he'll flee from you. So we want to get away from that as soon as we can. Run to God. The next thing to do is to see the situation from his perspective. Get into that high tower and look out from God's perspective. And James 1:14 and 15, James reminds us that each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. And then after that desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. So God's perspective is this is a process that begins right there when you have that evil desire in your heart. Right there is when the battle begins. Not when sin presents itself and you're right in the middle of it. You're not waiting until the enemy comes right up to the door and is, doing the battering rams trying to get in. It started way before that. So get God's perspective, and it's a heart issue, is what God's saying. It starts way back there, not when the event begins to happen. It starts really early. So run to God. Start looking at things from his perspective. It's a heart attitude. And it's learning to spot the enemy a long way off. Watch your life. You know when you start to get those feelings, those desires, those thoughts come into your life. Right then, we need to start that battle. See the enemy a long way off. In fact, I love Romans 13:14. And it says, "Clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ, and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh." He says, don't start thinking about how you're going to accomplish it. Don't start making details and plans about, well, this might happen, so I'm going to prepare for that. I'm going to get ready because I think it's inevitable. It's going to happen. I know I'm going to say that thing or do that thing or look at that thing. Don't make any provision for that area of your flesh or desire. Don't do it. Recognize the enemy far off and start a battle plan right then. Take action early to defeat the enemy. Instead of making plans to accomplish the evil thing, start making plans now about what you can do to disrupt that process. I'm going to stop this. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to text somebody and say, will you pray for me? Hey, I know that for me, being in the airport, I know when I walk through an airport, there are certain bookstores that are everywhere that have a couple of racks of magazines in them that I'm not supposed to look at. It's not good for me. It doesn't edify me. So I have to, before I get into the airport, decide I'm not going to do that. I'm not even going to walk by that place. I'm going to stay out of it. And if I forgot snacks, too bad. I have to find a different place to get snacks. I'm not going to go in there. So you make plans in advance not to do the right thing or not to do the wrong thing. So you're taking action early to defeat the enemy. Don't wait till the enemy is with a battering ram at the door. That's way too late. I love that Paul talks about this process, and sometimes when we have temptation or we're struggling with something, we give up pretty easily. Like, well, it's going to happen anyway. I'm going to do it. I know I'm going to say that to that person. I know I'm going to look at that, or I'm going to act in a particular way. And so we just go ahead and say, okay, I'm just going to do it because that's what's easy to do. But Paul says in Hebrews 12:4, he says, in your struggle against sin, you haven't yet resisted to the point of shedding blood. He's like, you're fighting, but you're not fighting hard enough because I don't see any bruises on you. I don't see any blood dripping. You're not really fighting this temptation. He expected that we would do battle even against our own flesh. We're going to fight this thing. We are being determined. We're going to see the enemy coming a long way off and we're going to do something about it. We're going to fight. Jeremiah 12:5 is an interesting thing. Jeremiah is kind of complaining to God about, God had called him to be a prophet to speak the word to the people, and he's preaching away, and he's telling people what they need to do, and they're not listening. In fact, they're attacking him. Some of them capture him, beat him up, put him into a pit, leave him there to die, and he's just like, what is going on, God? This is way harder than I thought it was going to be. And he's complaining a bit to God, and God answers back this really short little passage, which I love. It's this little picture, and he says in Jeremiah 12:5, if you're racing with foot soldiers and they're wearing you out, what are you going to do when the men on horseback get here? If you're stumbling and having a tough time in this safe country, the nice flatlands, what are you going to do when the battle gets down into the thickets by the Jordan? See, what he's saying is what you're facing now, the temptation you're facing now, the challenge, the difficulty that you're facing now, in the scope of things is a little thing. And if this is messing you up, what are you going to do when the battle really heats up? See, God has a plan and a purpose for us. And he's preparing us now, getting us ready for what's ahead. And so this is, in a way, this is a bit like boot camp. This is a bit like training for us. And he's saying, you got to learn to conquer this situation, to deal with this temptation, to deal with this sin issue in your life. You got to learn to deal with it now because I got bigger stuff for you to do. And we got to get past this because I want you to be strengthened and prepared because the battle is coming. The thing I created you for is on the horizon. There is a purpose ahead, and I want you to put this behind you. See, right from the beginning in Genesis 4:7, God said to Cain, if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. So right from the beginning, God warned us, this stuff is serious. This stuff is heavy. And if you're not careful, it'll overwhelm you. And so we have to have a plan. And our plan is to attack it, to be strategic. And it begins first running to God. Go into his presence. See things from his perspective. Get that big picture view of what God is doing in your life. And then he says, look out and see the enemy a long way off. Recognize him. Don't do anything that'll lead you in that direction. Instead, be prepared to attack starting now. What do you need to do right now to make sure that you don't find that enemy with a battering ram on the door of your heart and your life? So God has a purpose for us, and part of that purpose is to strengthen us and prepare us for the battles that are ahead, to make us strong in him. It means we have to abide in him. So let's spend time in his presence. Let God give us vision to see, and then a strategic plan to deal with the enemy so that he will not rule over us. Amen? Let's do that today.